often it's then when we're able to see what God was doing in us. Like, oh, that's what he was doing. And you begin to take great comfort even in the thing that restricts your emotion and your mobility. Because I don't want to be anywhere that God does not want me to be. So God, if you've got to yank me real quick, right? If you've got to move me out of the way, move me out of the way. And oftentimes, for those of us that have interacted with little children, you recognize that they get themselves into situations and circumstances that require quick, immediate, and swift action, and oftentimes do not provide enough time for explanation, right? And so I'm going to yank you out the street. I don't have time to say, proceeding towards you at 45 miles per hour is a car proceeding in the 25 mile per hour zone. It's going to hit you in about 3 seconds. I don't have time to explain that to you. All I've got time to do is yank you out. And isn't that the same with God? Oftentimes there's not enough time to give you a whole detailed, long explanation either before or after, because as soon as he yanks you out, you get mad, get an attitude, you can go right back to your marbles, right? And so it's not oftentimes that this period of explanation, right? But all we know is that God, in hindsight, has kept us, has protected us. And so we learn how to appreciate the rod and the staff of God, that both are able to move us and to shift us, and also to beat back the hand of the enemy, even enemies that we don't recognize as enemies, right? God, why you gotta beat up that nice little sheep over there? You think it's a sheep. God sees that behind the sheep costume is actually a wolf, right? We see it as being this pleasant thing. It's like, hey, it's like and the sad part is that the wolf dressed up as a sheep is sometimes the nicest sheep you've ever seen in your life, right? Nobody treats you nicer than the wolf that's dressed up like a sheep, right? No one is more engaged or interested or provides you greater attention than the wolf that's dressed up as a sheep. No one is always there when everyone else has left you, but the wolf that's dressed up like a sheep. Look, all the rest of the sheep that left, I'm all here all by myself. But look, here's that faithful wolf dressed up like a sheep to make sure that I'm okay. Not recognizing that oftentimes the wolf is actually the one that's creating the situation to alienate me, is often also the one that's waiting for these periods of vulnerability to launch for the attack. But we believe that he's acting in our best interest. Then all of a sudden, here comes God. Here comes the shepherd, beating back the nicest sheep I ever knew. And we don't recognize until years later that that sheep was actually a wolf in disguise. And then we look back and say, oh, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It's good to know that even when I don't have the discernment to see clearly, that the great shepherd, he knows, he recognizes who I am, he recognizes what's around me, and he protects me from things that I'm not aware of. Of course, the critical thing that we were talking about last week was the Lord restoring our souls. And I think that it's really interesting because I think that we struggle in our version of Christianity or in our time period because we really are so, and I don't understand how it happened, we are so focused on materialism. We are really devoted to what we can see, what we can experience, those tangible things. We're really devoted, and it's funny because we're kind of sometimey in terms of how it is we're devoted to things that we can see versus things that we can't see. And so to the extent that there are monikers of success that give us great self-esteem, then we are certainly interested in esteem. To the extent that there are things that give us cause to be highly regarded in the sight of others, we can't see highly regard, as it were, but we become very interested in those sort of things. And yet when it comes to our soul, which also isn't seen, it takes us a while to recognize when our souls are in danger. It takes us a while to recognize when our souls are in perilous condition, right? And so while we may have sickness in our bodies, the truth of the matter is that because some of us get so busy and so engaged, we don't even recognize the signs that our bodies give us anymore, right? And so in times past, people would notice that, oh my goodness, my energy level isn't where it's supposed to be. I think I'm not really feeling all there. But now, because we keep our minds engaged in so many different things, sometimes it takes us a while to actually recognize that something is going wrong. Now, if it takes us that long, and the funny part is that sometimes people that are around you can see that you're sick before you realize that you are sick. They're saying, something about you just doesn't look right. You don't seem yourself, but we're so engaged in what we're doing that we don't recognize that these things are taking a toll on us, and our bodies are actually giving indicators that we're not as well as we should be. If we are not cognizant of our bodies, which we can actually look in the mirror and see, our bodies, which we can actually like feel and be knowledgeable of, how much more then is it possible for our souls to be at ill ease or to be diseased and us not be cognizant or mindful of it? The same things that distract us from knowing our bodily condition to a more exponential factor can be those same things that keep us from acknowledging or recognizing that our souls are diseased or at ill ease. So for example, continue to be busy, continue to do so many other things. Being distracted can keep us from recognizing that our souls are in need of restoration. The Bible says, and this is actually the writings of the Apostle John, where he will say in the New Testament, "Beloved, I wish above all things that you prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers." And so the prosperity of the soul is something that God is intimately concerned with, intimately involved with. He's a vested interest in. You'll recall from the prior week, we said that Jesus said, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and to lose his soul in the process?" At some point, you may encounter a person that seems like they're soulless, right? If we look at the body, is that what you're able to see? If we look at the spirit, is that which animates us and gives us life? There's something else besides body and spirit that makes us us, right? And so the fact that I can move, the fact that I can talk, the fact that I'm breathing, I'm alive, but is it really me, right? So when we talk about people that experience significant trauma, brain trauma, things of that nature, sometimes they can still breathe, sometimes they can still talk to you, but you recognize the person that you're talking to is not the same person that you knew before, right? That additional dynamic, that thing that, oh my goodness, you used to care so much about animals, but now you're like smacking animals to the ground. What happened to you? Who are you? Right? Right? Something has happened in the soul level, right? There's something happened in terms of the soul is defined as the seat of the emotions, right? It's where your values sit. It's where your heart sits. That's where the things that you care about sit. All of that sits in the soul, right? It's that thing that makes you from a personality standpoint. People are able to say, "Oh, I know who that is," right? It's that ability even when it's not you that's talking, when someone says something that reminds them of you, they say, "Oh, that sounds just like so and so." Not because it's the same voice, not because it's the same person, because obviously it's a different person saying it, but because there's something about that personality, that response to stimuli that says, "Oh, that's how that person would have responded," right? It is possible to lose your soul, right? It's possible to do that. It's so possible to get so caught up in keeping up with the Joneses that you forget your values, who it is that you are as a person. There are things that perhaps you said, "I would never do that," and yet engaged in the wrong series of conversations, you can become that person that's the gossiper, right? Yet engaged with the wrong group of people, getting caught up in the moment, you can become that person that now all of a sudden starts hurling insults at other people. You ever had that happen? You ever seen that happen to someone before? The nicest person in the world, they start hanging out with the wrong crowd, and all of a sudden you look, you don't realize who that person is anymore. You never talked about people like that, but now you're doing. You never insulted people like that, but now you're doing. You were never that type of person, but now you've lost yourself in the process, perhaps, of trying to gain acceptance, perhaps in the process of trying to gain notoriety, perhaps in the process of trying to gain friends. You can lose your own identity. Does that make sense to anybody? You can lose your soul. Certainly in the pursuit of money, you can lose your soul. Money can anesthetize you to stuff. Money can make you not sensitive to the plights of others. Money can make you no longer concerned about others, because it's very easy to become increasingly selfish, right? Selfish, self-centered. Folks, remember playing with the marbles, doing my own thing? When you start getting involved with your own self, focusing on your own self, it becomes very difficult for you to remember that there are other people besides you. That's how you start losing your soul, right? You lose your connection to other people. We said that soul is that thing that people recognize about you. It's that thing that connects you to others. It's possible to live life totally disconnected from other people. You've got the attainment of what you've wanted, but what have you lost in the process, right? So we've talked about that, right? Able to lose your soul that way. The Bible says, this is the psalmist who will speak again. He said, my soul is like a bird in the snare and the fowler. The trap is broken and we are escaped. It is possible for the soul to be tracked. It's possible for the soul to be tracked. It's possible for the soul to actually be limited. It's possible for you just to be stuck. The soul can just have restrictions and not able to move. In compensation, we have position restrictions, right? We say for this position, it can be a grade 5, it cannot be a 6, it cannot be a grade 4. And so therefore, you only get paid this amount because the position restrictions associated with this particular role. And the soul can be tracked. It can be restricted. It can want to engage and yet not be able to engage. It can want to be sensitive and then lose sensitivity, right? It can want to believe, and yet because trust has been violated so many times, it just cannot bring itself to believe. Very tangible example of that, right? People that get involved in close personal relationships with others, when they sometimes see that trust violated, even when in their minds, right, because the mind is different, right? Even when in their minds they want to believe that the person is telling the truth, they want to be able to trust. There's something inside of them that still cannot trust. That's that soul area. That makes sense, right? And so it is the soul that the enemy actually attacks. The truth of the matter is that you get the right chemicals, you get the right whatever, and we can impact your mind, right? So that's one thing, right? You can, unfortunately, there are people that we have known and loved you, their brain function can be interrupted, etc. But they're still in there. But what the enemy wants to attack, he wants to actually gain access to the soul. And so it's very difficult, again, to describe this, but hopefully in these last couple of minutes, by virtue of examples, you are approximating in your own mind sort of what this definition of that soul region is, right? So it's not the body, right? The soul is not necessarily the body, right? The soul, we're not talking about the mind, right? We're not talking about the intellect or the intellectual capacity, right? Because your soul does not grow because you read a book, right? Your knowledge increases, but that's not the soul, right? Your soul that we're talking about is not simply the animation of your body, but the soul is that deeper thing, right? That deeper thing that allows you to connect or disconnect, to engage, to feel, to the seat of the emotions is what is commonly referred to as. And so when God has to restore the soul perhaps that has been trapped, restore the soul that has been hurt and is now disconnected, restore the soul that has holes and voids. The soul also can not only be lost, the soul can be damaged, right? Because the Bible also talks about sexual immorality and things of that nature, things that are able to damage the soul. And so there are things that are actually able to cause voids in the soul, and these voids cause people to begin to make choices in order to try to accommodate or to make amends for what's going on in their souls that they can't seem to wrap their arms around or put their finger on. Does that make sense to anybody? And so these soul issues wreak havoc in people's lives. And of course, if you're talking to people and people are only able to see the physical body you, and they're only able to hear what you're able to verbally express from your mental state, then you can actually have things going on the soulish level that people have no awareness of. In fact, you can have things going on the soulish level and you not even recognize it. Now, the perfect example of this, and I recognize this is a lot of introductory text, so please forgive me, but I'm trying to paint the picture of the concept, right? Somewhere along the line, there was this man whose name was Ebenezer Scrooge. And for those of you that remember the TV show, I used to love that TV show, I used to watch it, right? And it was actually this guy, and he was surrounded by people that were in need. He actually had a great deal of financial wealth that he had attained. But in his pursuit of financial wealth and in his desire to have more and more, he became increasingly selfish and some would even perhaps say miserly. And so while there are people that have talked to him and reached out to them, none of them are able to penetrate him because he's kind of self-absorbed and he's not able to see himself outside of himself. And it's not until he's visited by these three ghosts, right? The ghost of Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future, that he's actually able to see the condition of his own soul, as it were. right? Because all that time he couldn't see it until he began to actually see it as an outsider. And then he realized, oh my goodness, there's something wrong with me, right? Sort of like David when the prophet comes to him and says, no, David, you are the man, you're the one, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that. Now I see what the problem is. I'm the one that's having the difficulty. What we never got a chance to delve into, and it probably wasn't consequential to the story for what the narrator was trying to say, we never actually got a chance to find out in terms of Ebenezer Scrooge what all those things were that perhaps got him to that position that he was in, right? But certainly there's probably something that he was trying to make up for, right? Because in often cases what we find is that we're oftentimes overcompensating for something that's deficient in us from our soul's perspective, right? And so where we perhaps might lack confidence, sometimes attaining money might help give us that extra whatever. Wearing the brand name labels might help us to have a sense of worth, where internally our soul feels worthless. Right? And so sometimes the mind can say pride, where the spirit or the soul is saying lack of self-esteem altogether. And so again, your mind and what your mind communicates are not always the same thing, or do not always clearly indicate what's going on in the soul region. And so the psalmist has been walking with God, and he says there's one thing that's punctual here that you've got to recognize, something that's important. He restores my soul. And walking is good, being protected is good from physical danger, but something that's paramount is that I need God to restore my soul. And I think that for a great portion of the world in which we live today, certainly there was this whole, and this is not about being political or anything like that, but certainly there was pause that was caused in this country when people saw children being killed in a school in Florida. Similar pause happens in schools whenever we see it. And I think that part of it is that, remember I told you that when we look in the mirror, we oftentimes don't see it. When we look in the window, things become much clearer. Every once in a while, society pauses, looks at itself and says, for somebody to go and shoot up kids in the school, what in the world is wrong with us? And at once, things that were so important all of a sudden don't become very important anymore, because people that have a whole lot of money, that have their children in school, recognize that your money is not going to protect your child when that happens. And how much is your money worth when you're watching bodies of children being carried outside of a school? Does that make sense? Right? All of a sudden, we begin to ask questions of eternal significance, right? The weightier matters of life all of a sudden begin to happen. Today I might be upset because only 3 people liked my Facebook status, only 2 people liked my Instagram status, etc. And then something like that happens, you realize, wow, in the weightier periods of life, what's really, really important here, and we begin to just look, and sometimes people start to look at their collective conscience, right? This is not just individual conscience, but collective conscience as society. What has happened to us? Right? Certainly we ask ourselves the question with respect to the shooters, what's happened to them? Right? What happened that caused them to get to this phase or get to this state or whatever? How does this happen? How does something like this happen? And then, of course, we try to reconcile it within ourselves, right? How do I adjust to a life where I recognize that at any point something outside of my control could happen? Right? These are things that impact us, not simply at the mental level, not simply at the physical level, because I wasn't even there anywhere near Florida, right? But they impact us at the soul level, right? It causes us to be to gain things like perhaps fears that we did not have before, distrust. I better start looking extra careful, right? There are things that it impacts us. It impacts us. It changes us for better or for worse, right? Sometimes it causes us to stereotype people, like, I know somebody looks just like that. You look just like that, right? It changes how we interact with one another, how we interact with people, how we see people, and it causes people to start trying in the search for solutions. Sometimes we look at trying to blame others. This is your fault if you hadn't done this. This is your fault if you hadn't done that. And we start pointing and blaming and all those sort of things. But guess what? It never gets back to the core question of what's going on in our souls. Right? Because although we might point at this particular person or that particular person, the truth of the matter is that in some respects it could have been anybody. Right? It could have been anybody. And it's the same thing that goes for the children. I mean, it happened to be at that school, but it could have been any school. Could have been at any time. And so how do we get our souls restored from the things that we encounter in everyday life that while it looks like it's designed to take away this or that other superficial thing, we recognize that behind the scenes, the enemy is still after the souls of people. Right? I mean, at the end of the day, the devil doesn't just want your body, like, hey, now I have a body piece, but he really wants the souls of people. And to what extent are we seeing our own souls being damaged and yet not taking the time to pause that God might restore and bring into proper balance that spiritual aspect of us? And so I need to press on, but I keep seeing so much in the text, right? Y'all see the text here, right? Right? And so when my soul is in good condition, as we said before, I'm able to have, I'm able to go through things and not have fears. One of the things that indicates that my soul is in trouble is when I'm living a life that's full of fear. Whether it's fear of failure, fear of success, fear of the boogeyman, right? Whatever that fear is that's immobilizing you, whatever that fear is that's coming against you, your fear is an indicator that something is not right. There's some degree of peace that's been disrupted at the soul level. Does that make sense? Right. There's something that's wrong at the soul level. God, help me, because again, when my soul is at peace, right, perfect love will cast out fear, right? And so to the extent that I have a fear issue is because I've not fully allowed, for some reason, the love of God to overtake my soul, and wherever there's that void, there's this fear that's there. Right? When I'm not able to have peace, right? When I'm not able to have peace, when I go to sleep at night and my mind is racing and I cannot get myself into a place of peace, right? When I'm constantly in a state, sometimes the opposite of peace is sometimes it's confusion, right? Sometimes it's just a general sense of unrest. The text says his rod and his staff, they comfort me. You're not able to get comfortable. You're not able to find comfort. You're constantly on edge. Now, if this is one of those deliverance courses, right, we teach you about demons that are behind all these sort of things, right? And it's that spirit that causes me on the edge all the time, right? What we're really talking about, though, is that what are these things that are indicators to you that something is going wrong in the soul space and that I need restoration from the hand of God? That I need God to give me that peace again, such that when I'm walking with God, see, because it's a terrible thing to walk with God and still not be at peace. And the problem is not with God. The problem is that I can yet be in the presence of God and yet my soul be so fragmented that even in his presence I don't find peace there. Right? Even in his presence I don't find that fear has been taken away. Even in his presence I don't find joy there, right? Because in the presence of the Lord there's the fullness of joy. And so if I don't have fullness of joy, it's because there's something that's fragmented in the soul realm, right? And so it's sort of like carrying a jar, right? Your soul actually bears things. Your soul is said to carry things, right? And so it's like having a jar that's broken. And so you're in the presence of God and you're like beat, and God is pouring joy into you, but because your jar is fragmented, as much as he's pouring it into you, it's dripping out of you, right? And so what we could do is constantly have church over and over again and keep pouring little joy juice in you over and over again. Or we could say, you know, there's something fragmented. We need God to heal this jar, this soul jar that you have, so that when God pours joy into you, it doesn't just leak out by Sunday afternoon. Right. And if you're not careful, you will encounter people in life who have fragmented souls, who you'll talk to them and they're struggling with some sort of soul issue in terms of what they believe concerning themselves, what they believe concerning God, and you will try to pour into them, and as soon as you've poured into them, it's actually all splattered all over the floor, and in the exact same spot where you started with them. You're like, what in the world has happened? And it's not that you're not pouring in good joy juice or good peace juice, etc. The problem is that they have a fragment, they have a hole, they have a void that no matter how much you keep filling up, it's going to keep leaking out. As they constantly need the affirmation to be reminded over and over again, because as soon as they leave your presence, it's run out for them again. And so it's not enough simply to provide motivation to people. That's why we constantly say this. Motivation can be good, but the truth of the matter is that we've got to do more than motivate people. We've actually got to get people's souls healed. Right? We've got to actually get people healed in the deepest part of themselves, so that way when they're poured into, it doesn't just drain all over the floor. Right? And anybody ever experienced the healing from God before, when you had experienced something and it impacted you, and it impacted you to a certain extent, and your soul was demonstrated, but then all of a sudden, God did this thing. And most of us probably can't point to the exact moment. All we know is that at some point, you looked as like, this does not impact me the way that it was before. It's sort of like you cut yourself, whatever, and you go through a series, and you might put a bandage on it. If you're like me, you probably don't put a bandage on it, whatever. And then all of a sudden, you look, and one day you don't know what happened. It's like, might have been a scab at some point. And all of a sudden, it's like, hey, the pain is gone. The scab is gone. It's healed. It's back to the way it's supposed to be. And that's what God does in the healing of our souls. He actually heals us, and we look and we're like, oh my gosh, the scab is gone. The pain is gone. It's gone away. But you've got to acknowledge before God the soul damage. And you've got to, if there was a door that you've opened to the adversary that allowed that hole to come in, if there's a sin or something, unconfessed sin, you say, God, forgive me for what I did that caused that. The truth of the matter is that, God, I need you to restore me. Does that make sense to anybody? And this is what God promises to do to us if we will trust him, if we will believe him. God promises to restore our souls. And this is important because the truth of the matter is that if we're going to be successful in life, if God is going to entrust us with what he wants to entrust us with, we've got to get these us issues straightened out. Right? We've got to allow God to bring that wholeness and healing to us. Because the truth of the matter is that the apostles' not admonition, the apostles' aspiration or desire that you would prosper and be in health as your soul prospers will mean very little to you if your soul is not prospering. If you're not okay inside. If you're not, see, money doesn't do anything if you've got a problem internally. Having all the friends in the world will be nothing to you if you're not okay on the inside. Right? Jesus said, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives. Right? God is looking to give us that peace. He's looking to take that fear away. He's looking to do all those things that we need. Remember, but we've got to trust him to do it, and we've got to allow him to do it. Now, God cannot heal, or God will not heal what you will not let God touch. And God will not heal what you will not let God touch. And so therefore, you've got to come to a place where you're willing to open up to God and ask God to heal areas which are very difficult, perhaps, for you to even admit exist. Because sometimes pride gets in the way. We don't even want to admit that we've got an area that we need God to heal us from. Because we're either embarrassed about it, we don't want to acknowledge it, or we've done a very good job of ignoring it. And to accept that we ignore it, we think it doesn't exist. Even though it does, it always seems to announce itself at the wrong time, right? But we need God to bring healing and bring resolution, right? Because there's some chapters we just can't. You can't even start the new chapter until you close the old one, but you can't close the chapter in an environment where you've not healed what happened in that old chapter, right? And so you try to go to a new chapter, but then something happens from the old chapter that you haven't got healed from, and it keeps dragging you back, and you keep finding yourself in the same cycles over and over again. But if you get healed from that, then God can actually introduce you in the new chapter, and you can actually start again, start a new page, right? For some of us, God wants us to start a new page, but he's trying to heal us from the stuff that keeps dragging us back to the old page. That makes sense to anybody? Okay. I have talked for a long time. My throat is dry. Amen. But we're standing, we're preparing to pray, and we're looking unto the Lord, amen, to bring the healing that we need.